My mother split my lip at my own wedding. 200 Marines watched blood drip onto my dress. But the slap wasn't the crime. The slap was a distraction, and my sister had spent 8 years building the thing it was supposed to hide. If you've ever had someone smile at your face while quietly working to unmake your life behind it, this story is for you. Stay to the end because the person everyone in that chapel pitied by the final scene was not who they expected. Like this video, subscribe, and let's get into it. My name is Thea Rivers, 32 years old. Captain, United States Marine Corps Logistics Officer, currently posted at Quantico. I grew up the way a lot of people do in families that look fine from the outside, dinners on time, matching Christmas cards, a mother who called every Sunday at 6. What you couldn't see from the outside was the ledger my mother kept in her head. Who had disappointed her? Who owed her? Who had, in her words, gotten above themselves? I was the one who got above myself. I left for Paris Island at 18 instead of the state school 40 minutes from home. I sent money back when I could. I called on Sundays too, mostly to hear her tell me gently that officers' wives ended up alone, that the Corps would chew me up, that I should come home before it was too late. My sister Renata never left. Renata stayed in our hometown in the house 2 streets over from our mother, and became, over the years, the daughter our mother introduced first at every gathering. Renata managed things. Renata handled the finances after our father died. Renata had power of attorney just in case anything happened, a phrase our mother repeated so often it stopped sounding strange. I didn't think much of it. I was 3 states away, learning how to keep 200 Marines fed and fueled and moving. I didn't have room in my head to wonder why my sister always seemed to know things about my life that I hadn't told her. Then I met Daniel Brooks. Daniel flies KC-130s. He is the kind of calm that isn't the absence of feeling. It's feeling fully processed before it ever reaches his mouth. We got engaged after 2 years. I called my mother first. She was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Well, I suppose Renata will want to know too." Not congratulations. A logistics note the months before the wedding. Small things started happening, but I couldn't quite name as a pattern yet. A cousin mentioned at a bridal shower that she'd heard the wedding fund hadn't come through the way it was supposed to. I didn't know what that meant. I wasn't using a wedding fund. My grandmother had left a modest trust years earlier, meant to be split between Renata and me when we married, administered by our mother until then. I never touched mine. I never needed to. My mother started calling more, but the calls felt different. Less checking in, more circling. She asked, more than once, exactly when the wedding was, exactly where, exactly who would be there. She asked whether Daniel's family had old money or new money, a question so nakedly strange I laughed it off at the time, 2 weeks before the wedding. Renata called me a rare event and asked almost too casually whether I'd looked at the trust paperwork lately. I said I hadn't touched it since I was 18. She said, "You should probably check before the wedding, just to be safe." Then she changed the subject. I did not check. I was planning a wedding and running a supply chain for an entire company. I filed it under Renata being Renata and moved on. That was my mistake, and also, as it turned out, exactly the mistake I was meant to make. The morning of the wedding, my mother arrived at the chapel gate at Quantico wearing a gray coat and a visitor badge she should not have had. Base access for a non-military civilian for an event like this required a sponsor, someone with credentials to sign her in and vouch for her. I hadn't sponsored her. Daniel hadn't sponsored her. I found that out 90 seconds after she hit me. The ceremony hadn't started. I was in the vestibule in my dress, going over the timeline in my head out of habit, when my mother walked straight up to me, said, "You let her do this to me," and struck me across the face hard enough that my lips split against my teeth. I tasted copper before I understood what had happened. Blood ran down my chin onto white lace. The room, my aunt, my bridesmaids, half a dozen Marines in dress blues, went completely silent. Daniel stepped between us before I'd even finished registering the pain. He didn't raise his voice. He never does. He said, "You just assaulted an officer." Faced the wall, and my mother, shaking, did exactly that, because some part of her still understood what those words meant on a military installation. Base security had her within 4 minutes. And it was in those 4 minutes while I pressed a cloth to my mouth and tried to stop shaking that my mother said the thing that changed everything. Ask your sister what she did with your half. I didn't get married that day. I got answers instead. Base security couldn't hold my mother on anything beyond the assault itself. But they could tell me one crucial fact. Her visitor pass had been sponsored electronically 3 days earlier, under a Marine Corps ID number that wasn't mine or Daniel's. It was Renata's husband's, a reservist. Someone had used his credentials to get my mother onto a secured installation on my wedding day, that night. Still in my torn, blood-stained dress, I sat with Daniel and pulled every piece of paper I owned relating to my grandmother's trust. What I found took 3 days to fully untangle with a lawyer, but the shape of it was ugly and simple. Renata, holding power of attorney over our mother's finances since our father's death, had spent 8 years slowly draining the trust, not in one theft, but in dozens of small transfers dressed up as administrative fees and loans, each one small enough that our mother, whose eyesight and patience for paperwork had both been fading, never caught it. My half of the trust, the half meant to come to me on my wedding day, had been reduced from just over $90,000 to less than $6. Renata needed a reason it would never come out. And she needed one that wouldn't point at her our mother, proud, easily wounded, always quick to believe she'd been wronged, was the perfect instrument. Renata had spent months feeding her a story, that I cut Mom out of wedding planning on purpose, that I told people Mom wasn't invited to certain events, that I was ashamed of her. None of it was true. All of it was designed to detonate exactly once, publicly, loudly enough that if anyone ever did open the trust paperwork afterward, the story in everyone's mind would already be set. The humiliated mother, the ungrateful daughter. Not the sister who spent 8 years stealing. The base sponsorship was the last piece. Renata's husband's ID got our mother through the gate. Renata needed the confrontation to happen somewhere with witnesses who couldn't be dismissed as biased, not the family, not the hometown, but 200 Marines and officers, who'd remember exactly what they saw and, crucially, whose word would carry weight if this ever went further than a slap. She got that. She just didn't control what happened after. I didn't confront Renata over the phone. I flew to see her in uniform, with the trust documents and a forensic accountant's preliminary report in a folder under my arm. She opened the door, already talking, already reaching for the script she'd built for 8 years, how hard it had been managing Mom alone, how I never appreciated what she sacrificed staying home. I let her finish. Then I set the folder on her kitchen table and said, $91,000. 8 years. I have the transfer dates. I watched her face do something I'd genuinely never seen it do before. It emptied out. No script left. I didn't scream at her. I didn't need to. I told her calmly, the way Daniel would have told her, exactly what was going to happen. The funds would be repaid in full through a legal settlement, or the documentation would go to both the trust attorney and, given the fraudulent use of a service member's credentials to access a federal installation, to base legal as well. Her husband's career, a reservist standing, was now sitting on the table between us two, and he hadn't even known what she'd used his ID for. She paid it back. All of it within 4 months through a structured settlement her lawyer clearly recommended so she wouldn't end up facing federal questions about base access on top of the theft. Our mother, when she finally understood, really understood that the daughter she'd struck in a wedding dress was the one telling the truth, didn't call to apologize. She's never fully forgiven herself enough to say the words. But she stopped taking Renata's calls, and that, from her, is its own kind of verdict. Daniel and I got married 6 weeks later, in the same chapel in a much smaller ceremony. No gray coat at the gate this time. Just people who'd actually been sponsored, and a fresh stitch in my lip that had mostly healed. People love to say blood is thicker than water, like that settles anything. It doesn't. Loyalty isn't a birthright. It's something you have to actually earn every year the boring way. My sister spent 8 years building a lie instead of building trust. And when the lie finally needed a body to fall on, she chose our mother's hand in my face. The truth didn't need a slap to make itself known. It just needed someone willing to open the folder. If this story got under your skin, hit like, subscribe for more. And tell me in the comments, have you ever found out someone spent years quietly working against you while smiling to your face? I want to hear it.